Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bonzai Boulevard. And we're at Boulevard Recording in Hollywood, California, the entertainment capital of the world. I'm Mr. Bonzai, and we're going to talk about recording in this room long ago and still today. My special guest is Mr. Bill Schnee, very famous guy in the engineering world and producing world. And this is Clay Blair. He owns the joint. What a job, huh? Don't you love it?
Love it.
Yeah. He's also the chief engineer and videographer and multi-talented fellow. Just by way of quick background on Bill, he is a renowned engineer, mixer, and producer. He has over 125 gold and platinum records and 50 top 20 singles. Bill has worked on dozens of Grammy-nominated and winning albums and has been nominated 11 times for the Best Engineered Album, winning twice for Steely Dan's Asia and Gaucho. Interestingly enough, one of those was recorded in this studio, along with many, many others over the years. This place has had a really high and low and checkered past. It's been here since the 60s. It's some of the best and biggest albums of all time, best sounding albums and most successful albums have been recorded here. And Mr. Clay Blair over there, he bought it about 10 years ago and has done a wonderful job of actually recreating the way the studio was in its heyday. And that's, in my conversation or our conversation with Bill, I want to find out what it was about the acoustics in this place. And you've been in here a couple hours today. By the way, does Boulevard Recording still have that mojo that it had in the past?
Well, I'll have to bring a rhythm section in here and find out.
Yeah.
It certainly has the vibe. It's, been modernized a bit in terms of contemporary colors scheme and such.
Yeah.
But it's basically it is basically the same as it was. My history with this place goes back into the 60s.
Yeah.
My high school band got signed right when we graduated to Decca Records. And we did 4 singles. None of them made it, so they dumped us. But in recording those singles, the producer had brought in this talented guitar player to augment the band, Richie Podler, who also was a very talented engineer and producer. And he had a studio, and I went and visited him, and I told him the sad story that we'd been dropped, and he said, "Oh, you guys were great. I can get you a record deal, just on my word. Go see this guy, Mike Curb. He's going to go places." And
I've heard that name.
He wasn't wrong about that, yeah. And so I went to Mike Curb, and we basically came. He said he signed us. We went into Richie's studio. We cut one track, and he and Richie got in a fight, and that was the end of Richie Podler. So now our band is signed to Mike Curb. So I go back to his office, and what do we do now? And cheeky little Bill, at the time, I suggested, why don't I produce the band? And I didn't know anything about producing. And so turns out that Mike had a guy that was running the studio, Larry Brown, who actually had helped build the studio and had a great history with it. And it was interesting because he is a drummer. And we had lost our drummer when we lost our record contract. One of the parents got firm about, you can't do music as a profession. So he had to quit the band.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I heard it from my dad for years.
So this was done here?
Yeah, this was it. It was Continental Sound.
Wow,
and so
okay. Here, Continental Sound. I've heard that name before.
I'm going to produce us, and I don't know anything about producing. All I know is that our first producer turned the knobs, and our second producer, Richie Podler, turned the knobs. So, I
That's a good start.
I had fooled around with recording equipment. I recorded our band in our rehearsal place with just the 2-track sound on sound, but I didn't know how to do anything. So I said, Mike, another thing, we lost our drummer. And he said, oh, well, the engineer there is a drummer also. Oh, okay. So I came for the first session, and I said, I'm a keyboard player as a musician, but I'm a wannabe drummer. So I said, I offered to get the drums, play the drums while he got the sound, and then he would hit the record button and come out and get on the drums, and we made a take. But the funniest part to me was the console at the time had these little Longevin equalizers, the same ones that Richie Podler had. And it turns out, after talking to Larry Brown recently, that some of his history was with Richie Podler also.
Wow.
And that's probably where he got the idea assuming that he implemented those same equalizers. But he's just aligning the tape machine when I get here. And I said, what? I look over at the equalizers and there's an L. And I said to him, are those made by Longevin, the watch company? This is the only company I knew. And he's twisting the knob and he goes, excuse me? I went, oh, never mind, because I knew I'd put my foot in my mouth. So anyway,
you kids.
Yeah. So we did the first session, and that's it. So that was my start in this studio. Now, several years later, I've learned to engineer. I accelerated really quickly. All of my aptitude in school was in math and science. In fact, I entered college as in aerospace. So where that meant my musical side, the two brain halves, I learned engineering very, very quickly. And
how did this first recording you did here sound?
I couldn't tell you. I didn't know anything about sound, and I've never heard it since.
Oh, wow.
I've never heard it since. So I took off as an engineer right away, and very soon thereafter as a producer. I ended up working at Richie's studio, funny enough, which was amazing in itself, because 3 years earlier, I didn't know an equalizer from a limiter, and now I'm begging him literally to let me engineer in the most highly regarded rock studio in the city. And when I did the first thing that needed mastering, he sent me to up front with Doug Sachs. The mastering lab was brand new up in front. It was a year old or something. And Doug and I became very fast friends very quickly. Yeah. And he ended up being I refer to him as my graduate mentor. And
very important.
And when I left Richie's studio to go independent, I was one of the first independent engineers in the city. When I went to do that, I fell on my face because I really didn't know what made studios tick, and Richie did. He had a great sounding room with Celotex tile, the same as what you'll see around here. He had a great sounding room, high ceiling, so on and so forth, and really great electronics. And I went to a studio that, as I later learned, had terrible acoustics and a brand new console, but that was super quiet, but had absolutely no punch, no character, nothing, just hopelessly anemic. And speakers, and you also had to have speakers that made sense, and that had the new, and it wasn't JBL's fault, but they were the big JBL 4320s hung on a wall, and the speakers were everything was fooling me. And that's when I started getting advice from Doug. And one of the pieces of advice he gave, he said, you should check this studio out behind me. When I go back there, because they shared the bathroom at the time, I said, when I go back there, I stick my head in the door, everything seems to sound really good. Now, as far as I know, I don't know for sure, but I think it was the same console, the guts of the same console that was in here when the LA Teens recorded here, when I did my band here. And so I tried it out very soon thereafter on one of the first thing I produced for CBS when Clive Davis gave me my shot to produce was a band called Sweathog. And it was on CBS. You had to record in their studios. They had 3 studios, Sunset and Gower. and which I absolutely hated. They were all dead boxes with absolutely horrible sounding consoles. The CBS consoles of the 60s that were all tube must have been pretty good because there were some incredible recordings made back then.
That's only a couple blocks from here. Right.
Very short walk. But the ones now that they had, the transistor consoles were just horrible. And so while working, the Sweathog single took off right away, so we had to rush in and finish an album. And I found out, I said, what would it take to record in another studio? And you had to jump through some hoops, but because there was some success going, they let me do it. And I came here with Sweathog, and I remember, and I'm honestly still, I knew how to engineer. Like I said, I was now just learning how important acoustics and electronics meant to the recording. But I remember, I didn't know, so I remember taking the guitar player, who was the craziest guy in the band, out into the parking lot here where my car is parked, and I wonder what it would sound like out there with mics and stuff. And fortunately, there were no neighbors, but whatever. But anyway, that's just a bit of my history with this place.
Yeah,
and from there, I started.
Well, let me cut in really quick. So Sweathog, two good friends of mine are Lenny's sons, Taylor and Griffin Goldsmith.
Who have a good band, right?
Who have a really good band called Dawes, and we've recorded in here.
Oh, really?
And Lenny...
does he know that
he
knew?
When I first met Lenny, he said, well, Clay owns this old studio. What's it called? It used to be called Producer's Workshop. My first band, Sweathog, we did it, and then I played on a Martha Reeves record, and he loves this. He has such memories.
I did that here too.
Yeah.
So as you can see and hear, a lot of things have gone down in this room, which is historically people forget about studios and where it was done and how important that is.
Started working with Richard Perry. The first thing I recorded with Richard, the whole album, would be Ringo's album, Ringo. And we did that at Sunset Sound Studio 2, which, funny enough, as I later learned and was reminded, had a Sound Techniques console, which is what Clay has now put the new version in here. And they said he'd like a comment about the Sound Techniques console that was in here. And I said, well, I didn't work on it. And he said, sure you did. The first Ringo album was done here then. And I said, I don't think it was an API. And they brought the picture in, and I went, you're right. That was this console.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what goes around comes around.
And so that was kind of interesting. And then on the next album, the next Ringo album, I talked Richard into coming here. And we recorded quite a bit here with John Lennon, and who was with May Pang at the time.
Well, let's talk about that album, because when you look at the number of people that were in this room, I mean, it was kind of the creme de la creme of the recording world at the time. Besides John, weren't other Beatles involved in that album?
Yeah, not on that one. The previous album, there were a lot of them on, but that one, John only did one song one day, as far as I remember, and the first on the Ringo album. But on the second album, he did a lot. He was a lot more involved, and was incredible to work with. Just an amazing.
Yeah.
McCartney was amazing too, but they're just so different as human beings. Some backstory: Doug Sachs actually built the mastering lab when he learned that recording straight to the lathe sounded better than recording on tape and then putting it on the lathe. His partner, Lincoln Mayorga, was a very accomplished pianist, and they would go do piano recordings at a little studio on Melrose, and he'd play whatever he wanted to play. They would make him an acetate. They would take it home, because that's how you listened to music back then, and play the acetate. And one day they went in to do it, and lo and behold, the tape machine was broken. And so they said, so we can't record? And the engineer said, well, if you can't stop or make edits, but we could put it right on the disc. So they said, sure, let's do that. So they did that, went back to Lincoln's house, played it, and went, wow, played the previous ones. It sounds better, doesn't it? And that's where the germ of building the mastering lab came from. To that end, and fortunately for the mastering lab, they happened to be this great studio that was right behind the mastering lab. So they decided, when they built the lab, to do a direct-to-disc record. The sole purpose of it was to get business for their mastering studio. a bit unfair because, as I just said, if you record direct to the disc, it's going to sound better than if you go to analog tape and then to the disc. But still, people, so he was giving these records out to anyone and everyone to try to get business for the lab. And Lincoln had so much fun doing that he decided to do a second record. And I think Larry might have done the first one.
Yeah. That was in 68 or 9, I think. Yeah.
And I can't remember who. I was hoping, I was friends with Doug by 72, so I was hoping, and I knew he liked my work, so I was hoping he'd ask me, but he didn't. So someone else did the second one. But the third one that they did, he did. And he did ask me to do it, and I did it. And it was amazing because why? By then we're in the multi-track era. So you went in with a 16-track, you recorded a track, you did overdubs forever, blah, blah, blah. Then you spent a lot of time mixing it and so on. And then you took it to mastering. So the average record was probably taking 2 months back then, I would guess, 2 to 3 months. And now in 3 days, we had an album recorded, mixed, and mastered.
Wow.
And it was the most fun I'd ever had. In fact, I never smoked, but somebody had one of those cigars with a wooden tip. And I said, let me just have that. And I put it in my mouth. And when 15 minutes later, when the side was over, I took it out and it was splinters. I had splinters in my mouth. It was challenging, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Why? Because additional information, when you mix a multi-track tape, or today from a hard disk, when you pull up the piano, it's the exact same piano part with the exact same dynamics, etc. The drummer's playing, it's the same drum kit, the same sound, same everything. So the next time you play it, you know where it is. Think about it. These people are doing one whole side of an album, song 1, song 2, song 3, song 4. You get through the side, you take a break, and you do another take of the whole side of the record.
You're doing fades and everything live, right?
Everything is live. And these guys they're trying to play it essentially the same, but it's not the same. So mixing becomes really mixing. And I learned early on that was what, if I have a true gift, and I believe I do, it's for live mixing. And that's why direct to disc spoke to me so highly. So after that record, I went to Doug and I said, about a year later, 8 months later, I said, Doug, I want to produce a direct-to-disc record, and I want to do it with a vocalist. And it took me almost 2 weeks to convince him that he should consider it serious. He probably laughed at me and said, right, now what's your next song here? Let me master it. But it took almost 2 weeks to convince him that I could do it, because I just kept pounding him with my energy, and I know I can do it, and I think it'll be great. And it took 2 months to convince Lincoln. Lincoln had every reason in the world why not to do it. And this is not a record label. This is for us. And if we were going to do something like that, why would you get this kid do it? And blah 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 blah. But after a lot of 2 months of whining and whatever, he agreed to do it with a whole bunch of must have, must do, must be's. And so I started putting it together, and I had only worked with 2 singers at that time that I knew could walk up to the microphone on the last song and give a performance, because everybody by then was used to punching in, and and the first one was Barbra Streisand. I had just done mixed her last 3 records, and I called her manager, boyfriend, ex-hairdresser at the time, and said, it's the truth, who would go on to run a major movie studio for a number of years. It's Hollywood.
Yeah, it's Hollywood.
It's Hollywood.
And I said, I want to do this record with Barbara, an independent company, and we do the whole side of the, go away, kid, you bother me. I mean, it was almost that out of the movies. It was almost that.
So you asked you first.
Yes,
wow.
Yes. And he told me I was bothering him. I have work to do, kind of thing. And the only other one was a girl that I had brought in here, a new Motown artist that I did some vocals with. They did 4 sides with her. I did the vocals and I mixed them here. And that was Selma Houston. And I knew from doing the vocals with her that she sings like a bird. I mean, they're just incredible, perfect pitch and everything. And has absolutely gorgeous sounding voice, actually a better sounding voice than Barbara. And so I went to Motown. I had done some, mixed some Motown records. And so I had some kind of relationship with the girl that ran Motown for Berry Gordy, and we worked it out. And as I put the concept of the record together, several things became obvious. One was on the record that I had done and the records they had done, I found that there's an element of sameness to the record because you got the exact same band. So I decided to have two drummers, the most opposite feeling drummers that I knew of, Jim Gordon and Jim Keltner, both astounding drummers. I had two drummers. I had two percussionists. I had Dean Parks and Larry Carlton, two of the best guitar players to this day, two of the best guitar players. I had two incredible pianists, Larry Knechtel, Michael Omardian. I had an all-star band, just an all-star band. And I wanted to have horns. So I got 6 horns, and I wanted to have background vocals. Well, that's another thing. We always might have 3 background singers, but you double them to thicken it. So I got to have 6 background singers. And so then became the problem, looking at the room and the size of the room and what's going on, what are we going to do? And I went to the, at least manager, Ed Cobb at the time, and I said, Ed, I really need an isolation booth. You think that's possible? It's an important record. And over his shoulder there, I don't know if your camera picks it up, there's the isolation booth that they built for my Selma Houston record. And what's funny is that when Clay took this studio over, he called me and I came to visit and see what was going on. And by then I was in my middle 60s, I think. Yeah. And I walked into this room and looked at it, and I said to him, if I was asked to do that record again today, I wouldn't do it here.
Right.
It's the silliness of youth that would cause somebody to do something like that. It was so crowded. The horns were over in the front part of the room. It was so crowded that the horns, there was a seating, not a seating chart, but a seating order. The horns couldn't come in until everyone else, when they took a break, until everyone else came in, and then the seconds would come and put the horn mics back where they were, and then the horns could come in and sit down.
Wow.
Let me ask you a question about that. Do you think that that dynamics, that chemistry you're talking about, sure, it's crowded, but doesn't that pressure create something that's more, in the end, acoustically more memorable?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, interesting you bring that word pressure up because Doug thought that we should name the band. It shouldn't be Selma Houston album because there were some instrumentals. For one of the things Lincoln wanted was to, don't tax her by having her sing every song on every take. So we did some instrumentals and whatnot. And so because of that, Doug said, we really should credit the band. So let's call them Pressure Cooker.
Oh, wow.
And so the album is called Selma Houston and Pressure Cooker.
I Got the Music in Me? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The band is called that. Yeah, the album is called I Got the Music in Me.
That's incredible. I mean, I can imagine it, but it's hard,
you honestly
it's
can't.
hard to imagine how you got a good sound.
I'm telling you. But it was, and the other thing, since you can edit.
Yep, sure can.
Since you can edit, I can tell you that one of the other problems of direct-to-disc recording is, so the first one I mentioned, which is you got to mix. You have to literally mix every song, every take. A take is the full side of the album, and then when you go to pick a take, you're picking one whole side, and that what's involved in that? Well, the performance for sure, and the mix, the sound, and so you want it. Obviously, you want the best of everything, and you don't get it. That's all there is to it. But one other thing that can happen did happen. So we're on the second side of the album, and the last song was the Beatles song, Got to Get You Into My Life. And the whole side was going along incredibly. I was just over the moon with it. My mix, especially the sound, the music, her vocals, everything was great. We got to the last song, and we goes through the first verse and then the horn thing. And then the second verse, where's Selma? I grabbed the fader. Where's Selma? And you hear, I'm sorry. She locked up and had forgotten the opening line of the second verse.
Oh, man.
The producer has no choice but to hit the talk back and go, that's all right, sweetie. You're sounding great. We'll get it this time. And inside I'm going, I want to strangle her. And I thought for sure that was the one that got away. Doug listened to the outtakes several years later, and I don't know whether he really meant it or he was wanting me to feel good, because I always referred to the one that got away.
Yep.
And he said, it wasn't as good as you think. The take we used was better. And I said, well, at least it had a second verse on the last song. So there you go. But yeah, it was, I can honest, and by the way, Sachs, Doug and I became very, very close over the years. And on his deathbed, well, actually, it was 2 days before I was on his deathbed, but 2 days before was the last time he left the house. And we went to his favorite little restaurant, coffee shop in Ojai. And he said, Bill, Selma Houston was the most exciting record we ever made, and James Newton Howard Friends was the best sounding. And that was his way of, I argued with Doug over Sheffield, the whole life of Sheffield, because they ended up making lots of records that might have sounded good, but no one cared about the music. And I pointed out to him, the previous record that I only engineered in here of Lincoln songs, I said that in a lot of ways, that one might even sound better, but it's the music is why Thelma's took off.
Right.
And that's what I always said to him. People don't want good sounding LPs. They want good sounding music on an LP.
Yep.
That's so important.
So
Can we mention a couple of super memorable things that happened in this room, and give us just like a quick visual image and talk about it? Because Clay just told me that when Carly Simon recorded Hotcakes here, she was married to James Taylor, and she was actually pregnant. And this is where they recorded Mockingbird. Now, Mockingbird, I mean, these are the days when everybody heard a song on every radio station. What was that like? What was that? Just a quick kind of take on that scene.
Well, I knew the original version. Charles and Inez Fox, is that right? I knew the original version, and James did a version, which is kind of, I won't say big bandy, but it was nothing like what we ended up doing here. And I don't remember that much about the session, except that it was rocking. It was one of those times when I don't get to, unfortunately, on real takes, I don't get to come out in the room. But I actually have much better sound in there because I hear everything balanced. In the room, you don't always get that. But I do remember looking out in the room, and just, you could see it on their faces. Everyone, you don't always have that. But that was one of those sessions where, all the musicians were really enjoying what they were doing.
And they cut that live with vocal, right?
I think they did.
Yeah.
I think they did.
Because, it's so animated, that song.
Yeah.
How could you not? Or at least they sang it together if they had to recut it,
Yeah, I don't remember. I know they were singing live, though.
Yeah.
In my vocal booth, I guess. No, that was before the...
That was before
the vocal booth. So they were in the hallway.
Wow.
They were in the hallway.
Oh, this is great. We're getting an idea of what was going on in the evolution of this room. How about Steely Dan? I've heard stories, I used to be an engineer, and at that time in the 70s, we'd hear stories about, it would be weeks, months to get a drum sound or something.
Yep.
Of course, it's good for a studio owner.
So for sure, Gary Katz called me and said, would you like to record the next Steely Dan album? And I had several of my friends, Michael and Marty and Jeff Porcaro, had worked on those previous records where they took a long time. And my creativity likes to shoot from the hip. I don't like, going over and over and over and over and over. Mm-hmm. So I was a little nervous about saying yes, but I had to say yes. And boy, to my wonderful surprise, when we got into it, it was nothing like the tracking, which is all I did in here. They went off and did overdubs for months, and I don't know what went on there. The great part about that, I always want to point out, is that the heart and soul of every song I recorded is there on the final record. They didn't mess anything up. In fact, it's hysterical because Joe Bellamy was one of the assistants here at the time, was my assistant on at least some of Steely Dan. And years and years later, like 12, 14 years ago, I was having breakfast with him, and he somehow happened to mention that he had copies of the tracks.
What?
Yeah, these second engineers, they do bad things when people go home at night.
Mhm.
And he said he had copies of them. I said, you do? And I do. I said, well, I want them. Well, of course. I'll send them to you. And so he did. And then I called up and I was really mad at him. Why? Because he didn't get them all.
Oh, no.
He didn't get them all. I mean, I said, if you're going to be doing it, why? He didn't remember why he didn't get it. Maybe they switched seconds. I don't remember, but whatever. Anyway, when Gary Katz called me and asked me, he said, now the boys, are into drummers. So we're going to have a revolving door of drummers. You're going to be getting a new drum sound every few days.
Mhm.
I said, that's okay.
That's what I want to hear about drums in this room.
Yeah. So we had to, and it was the same basic drum setup. Don't ask me what it is. I wish there were pictures.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to know. I wish I knew. So indeed, it was a revolving door of drummers, and which was actually kind of fun for me. And the lads would, we cut a track or two with some drummer, and then on to the next one, kind of thing. And the lads would kind of talk about the drummer and what they had performed and whatnot, which I thought was kind of odd because aren't you listening to the whole thing? You know what I mean? And another very interesting thing to me was that they said Larry Carlton had, the boys would always do a piano bass demo of the song, sometimes with la-las, very seldom sometimes with a few lyrics or whatever. But they always had these great demos, and Larry Carlton had takedowns from their wonderful demos, the piano bass demos that they did. And more than once, some musician would say, why don't you just overdub the drums? And they, no, we'll get it better. If I jump ahead a little bit, about 6 months after Asia came out, I think, they called me to come in, producers, and cut a track for the movie FM. And Keltner was the drummer on that one, I remember. And we came in and got a track that I thought we thought they liked. They went off to do their overdubs on it. Turns out they didn't like the way he played the drums, and they took the piano bass demo and recorded Jeff Porcaro on it.
Wow. And
that's the record, the hit, which was much more of a hit than the movie ever was.
Wow.
Anyway, back to the sessions themselves. So in spite of my total nervousness about what it was going to be like recording with these guys with their reputation, the sessions were union sessions. That was the first album, the only album, where the whole rhythm section were professional musicians. They had used some professional musicians in, mixing with themselves and whatnot. Now they were all pros. And they were done as union sessions. And so we started at 2 every day, never went late into the night. And it was a no drug zone. I don't know, that might not have lasted long. I don't know, but at least for the tracking, that was Gary Katz had said, there's no drugs allowed. And it couldn't have been easier and better. It was wonderful. And so I remember the day they said, okay, after tomorrow, Steve Gadd's coming in. I was a huge fan of 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover by Paul Simon.
Oh, me too.
And that drag snare, how he incorporated that into that beat and whatnot. I thought, I can't wait. So he came, got the drum sound. We cut 2 tracks. I don't remember which ones. Cut 2 tracks. And the interesting thing is, after everyone left, the lads were milling about. And as I walked by them, right outside that control room, I heard them say, I didn't care for him either. And I'm sorry, what? And he said, who? And they said, Steve, you don't like him? Not him, his playing. Wait, what's wrong with his playing? I don't know. We like drummers like Jeff and Keltner that put the backbeat a little behind the beat. He's right. I said, and I remember what I said, guys, that's my favorite kind of drummer too, if I'm picking a drummer. But listen to what he played today. It's great.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure one of them is Third World Man, which is on Gaucho. The only reason I have a Grammy for Gaucho is that they came back and nipped the one song off the Asia sessions.
Wow.
So anyway, I was befuddled what they thought, but okay, they're into what they're into. And so I called my friend Richard Perry, very successful Richard Perry, and I said, Richard, you know who Steve Gadd is, obviously. Yeah. I said, I just did cut 2 tracks with him. He is a monster. Oh, really? Do you think I could have a take with? I mean, I said, Richard, he's leaving for New York after tomorrow. I don't. Well, what time do you start? Drats. 2:00. All right, let me ask. So I called Gary Katz. Gary, what about it? And Gary was a big fan of Richard's, but he also knew Richard's style of producing, which meant bleeding musicians, bleeding them dry with takes. He said, you got to be out at 1:00. If we don't start at 2, the boys will kill me. I said, I'll turn the monitor off, I promise. So I told Richard, that's the deal. Okay. So he shows up with this little short, affable, very affable fellow, Leo Sayer. And we started doing this song. And lo and behold, Steve starts not 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, but doing a groove with the drag snare that just felt incredible. Doesn't always happen, but it's happened a few times where there you go. No question about it. That is a hit record.
Wow.
Knew it right then. And
that was a last minute thing. That was like, let's fit this in.
Yeah. They had already cut it at Richard's studio, but when I told him about how good Gad was, he wanted to, see if he could do it.
Wow.
And the most amazing thing about that is that we got it in 2 hours and 35 minutes. Richard never got a track in that amount of time. He was used to 4, 5, 6 hours on a track. Like I said, making the musicians' fingers bleed, if not ears. And so he says, can we do another song? I said, Richard, we got 25 minutes. There's no way you can get another song in 25 minutes. He said, well, can we try? I said, okay, but I'm turning the monitor on. Okay. So he runs out. He had the chord chart already, evidently. She comes out, shows him what it is, and start doing it. And they rehearsed it a couple of times and did it. And darn, if we didn't I didn't even let him have a playback. I let the last take finish, which went 4 minutes, almost 5 minutes over. And I turned off. He said, you'll have to hear it back at your place. And sent him on his way. That song was called How Much Love. So that album that's the only thing I did on that album. The album came out. You Make Me Feel Like Dancing was number 1. When I Need You, the great ballad, was second single, number 1. The third single, which wasn't that big, was How Much Love. So that morning, in 3 hours and 5 minutes, we cut 2 hits. And that afternoon, I recorded the song Asia.
Wow.
That's what you call a great day in the studio.
My God.
The good old days, huh?
Yeah, but there weren't many like that. That's one of the goodest old days ever.
Wow.
And the funniest part of it is I didn't even think about it at the time. I didn't, like so much of me writing my book was all of a sudden realizing so many things that, you're just in the middle of it and just going on and on and on and on. But I was kind of surprised that I never put 2 and 2 together about what had happened that one day in recording. We cut 2 songs with Gad that day, by the way. Wow. We cut 4 songs in here with Gad, 2 with Richard and 2 for the boys.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, can you feel the vibe at Boulevard recording?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we just have a few stories about the Ringo album? I'm just really curious.
Well, except that, like I said, the Ringo album wasn't done here.
Oh.
At all.
It's credited here, though.
Well, we must have done some overdubs.
Okay.
But believe me, the lion's share of tracking,
all
the tracking was done there. I was always trying to get Richard to come over here.
But the second album, what you guys came and cut a lot of that, and that Lennon was here, and George wasn't on that one.
No. Or Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a hell of a band too. That was Klaus Vormann, Keltner, who was playing guitar?
Nikki Hopkins.
Oh my God.
Oh, geez. Right here in this room?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nikki Hopkins.
Incredible.
I know.
Just
not a real well named now. But
no.
His work is all over the place.
Much like Producer's Workshop, it really never got. It's amazing. It never. I don't think it ever got the notoriety it deserves.
Yeah. I was listening to both Ringo records this week, and whether you cut one mostly at Sunset, you cut the other mostly here, but man, the sound is just consistent. The one thing I was so amazed at was the presence of the vocal, and you're mixing these records on Aratones and writing big reds. I'm not sure if you mixed it here, if you mixed it at Cherokee or.
No, Sound Lab's the first. Oh, gods. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't.
But you got impeccable clarity in the top end, which in that part of the 70s was very hard to do. Those records to me sonically stand out above a lot of other things at that time. And that's you. I mean, that's you. The vocal is just so present in the most beautiful way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what to attribute it to other than the fact that my second mentor, Toby Foster, turned me on very early on to tube microphones. And this was when people didn't want them. You know, the U87 had come out, so nobody wanted a U67. That was tube, you know. And so I started buying tube microphones in the early 70s, like 251s, the Telefunken 251, which started out as my favorite microphone, tube microphone. I never paid I never paid more than $500 for one.
Wow.
I just sold one for $40,000.
Wow.
No, that's not true. The last two I bought in 1980, and I paid $2,500 for a pair, and I bitched about it for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, but that's the only thing I would know. I know that that I was bringing, because I don't think they had any tube mics here. If they did, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I know I remember that I would bring a 67 and use that on a lot of the vocals. I didn't want to bring it depends on the years. Once I didn't want too many people to know about the tube microphones because to start buying them like I was. And of course, by the late 70s, it caught on, and the prices started going up like crazy.
Were you using any of those Sheffield mics on those records? Or
no, the Sheffield mics didn't come for a long time.
Okay. Yeah.
But interesting that you mentioned that. When Doug decided to build better microphones, he went with the CK12 capsule, which is in what's a C12 or a 251.
Right.
And I have 6 of them now.
Wow.
And one of them has a 47 capsule in it for vocals. 251 is a phenomenal vocal mic if it suits the voice.
Yeah.
And a lot of girls it doesn't.
Right.
Because of their sibilants and so on. But the Neumann is great.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen out there in recording world land, thank you for joining us today at Bonzai Boulevard here at Boulevard Recording. Now you hopefully know a lot more about this place, and we'll be following through with more adventures of life in this studio as time goes by. Thank you, Bill Schnee, very much. Thank you, boss. You've done a good job here.
Great job.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzai.
All right. Well, stay tuned for more fun from Boulevard.